Let's begin with Once Upon a Time because that's a really good way of starting a story and it lets us know that it happened quite a long time ago. When you begin a story, always let people know roughly where you are. So here we are, we're in a forest in Germany. There was a young girl who always wore a red hat, a red cap. So she was known as Little Red Riding Hood. And one day, her mother gave her a basket with a cake and a bottle of wine and said to Little Red Riding Hood, "Take this to your grandmother. Go straight there. Don't dilly-dally and come back quickly." So Little Red Riding Hood took the basket with the cake and the wine, and instead of going the long way round by the road, she thought, "I will walk through the forest because it's much more fun." So she walked along the track through the forest, carrying her basket. And every now and again she stopped to pick some flowers, thinking to herself, "Grandmother will like those flowers." So the sun was already high in the sky by the time she met a man who didn't look quite right. And Little Red Riding Hood realised that the man was a shapeshifter. He was a werewolf. He was a man who can shift in and out of the shape of a wolf. So when the man asked her where she was going, she said, to my grandmother's. And then the man ran off ahead along the track, for he had worked out which little cottage it was that Red Riding Hood was going to. But the day was nice, and the sun was warm, and Red Riding Hood still dallied and still collected flowers and still listened to the birds as they sang. So by the time Little Red Riding Hood reached her grandmother's cottage, the werewolf had got there before her, and he had eaten her grandmother, and he had taken her clothes and put on her bonnet and put on her shawl and climbed into her bed. So when Little Red Riding Hood walked through the door, she saw in the bed someone that she knew wasn't really her grandmother. She said, "Oh, Grandma, what big eyes you have. All the better to see you with, my dear. Now come a little closer. Oh, Grandma, what big ears you have. All the better to hear you with, my dear. Now come a little closer. Grandma." And Red Riding Hood, knowing that she needed to run out of the cottage, said, I need the privy." And the man wolf said, "There's a pot under the bed." The Red Riding Hood said, No, I need to go cack. And she ran out of the cottage, but instead of going round to the privy at the back of the little house, she ran as fast as she could down the track that led to the river. For there, she knew, the women were washing sheets, and she could hear the sound of their singing as it wafted through the trees. And she knew that the man-wolf would follow her. So when she got to the river, out of breath, she managed to pant out to the washerwomen as they washed the sheets against the stones, "The wolf, the wolf, the wolf." So by the time the wolf had followed her scent down the track, and had arrived at the river, the women were ready for him. And they caught the wolf, the man wolf, the werewolf, in the sheets, and they wrapped him up so he couldn't escape and threw him in the river. And they took the big heavy stones that they used for washing the sheets with and threw them on top of the wolf. So he was never seen again. And that was the end of the werewolf. And that brings us to the end of Little Red Riding Hood. It's very different from the from the version that we all know, obviously. A lot of the kind of original versions of the Grimm stories do seem to have their roots going back a very long way. Jacob and Wilhelm, like all of us, they needed money. And they wanted to sell their books, and they wanted to sell their books to the literate middle class people who could afford to buy these very expensive things. So, with every edition of Grimm's stories, things have been increasingly sanitized. So, the version of Cinderella, which is coming up soon, is again quite different. In the original version of Cinder's, there is no fairy godmother. So that's a story that's coming up very soon. So if you'd like to find that, if you'd like to find that, do subscribe, because as always, the original is so much better. But of course, it is interesting the way that through the 19th century, of course, the role of the female characters, they become a lot more passive. In older stories, there's a lot more Amazon type women around. Lovely. I hope to see you again soon. Watch out for werewolves. Take care.